Why would you move a fruit tree? Well, obviously because it's in the wrong spot. And this can be for many reasons, but the most common reason is because it's not doing too well. For example, I moved this mulberry tree here because I inadvertently positioned it in a boggy area over here, which we didn't realise was boggy until we had a really wet rainy season, and then we found out that the tree was dying due to suffocation. G'day, I'm Mark from Self-Sufficient Me, and in this video I'm going to show you how to move or transplant a fruit tree. Let's get into it. I'll cover moving larger trees later, but the example I want to start with is this kumquat here that I transplanted from the ground into a grow bag. But I want to stress that the same basic principles apply to another container or indeed another spot in the garden. I decided to move it because I had enough kumquats in ground already. The tree was not growing well as it was getting shaded out, being in the middle of this starfruit and pomelo tree, and I wanted to use this gap in the outside of our orchard for a shaded composting area. In this case, transplanting the kumquat into a grow bag like this makes it easy to move if needed. It gives me the time to work out a better spot in the garden, or I could simply keep it as a container plant. So once you have established that you want to move the fruit tree, there are a few things to consider. Timing. Don't wait until the tree is nearly dead before trying to save it. If the tree has to be moved to save it, then do it ASAP, so that it has the strength in reserve to recover from its problems and transplant shock. Time of year. Generally it's best to move a tree when it's at its least active. And for most trees this is during winter, because just imagine a tree in the middle of its growing season or flowering and suddenly it gets dug up. That's quite a shock. It's best to dig out a tree when it's chilling out and not growing much. The other reason time of year is important is the weather and climate. If you transplant a tree in the middle of summer, unlike now which is starting to rain, the tree will suffer not only from heat stress but also transplant shock on top of it, and that'll make it doubly hard for it to be able to regenerate in the new spot. You have to remember that when you upset the roots, it takes time for those roots to settle down, so hotter times of the year will naturally make it harder for that tree to absorb moisture. Which brings me to pruning. To help decrease the loss of water through transpiration or evaporation of moisture via the foliage, it can help to prune back the fruit tree before moving it. That way the tree has less canopy to provide energy to, and it will lose less water through transpiration. Another thing to consider is the root system of the tree. Most fruit trees have a root system or root ball consisting of feeder roots close to the surface, larger stabilizing roots spreading out from the base, and a tap root right under the stem going straight down. Basically, when you're digging out a tree, you want to try to keep as much of that root ball as you can manage. And you want to also try to protect that taproot, because breaking that taproot off can be fatal. You probably will never get digging out an established tree perfect, but just do your best. Obviously the smaller the fruit tree, the easier it will be to dig out because it has less growth above and below the surface. Use a sharp shovel or preferably a spade to dig around the tree about 30 centimeters or a foot away from the stem. But again, this depends on the size of the tree. In most cases, you will need to press down with some force to sever the roots, or even use a handsaw to cut through any large ones so you don't end up breaking your foot. Once all the roots have been cut through, carefully lift the fruit tree out. Depending on the size, you may need some help. For larger trees, lifting onto a tarp or something similar and then dragging the tarp to the new spot can make the task easier. For very large trees, a digger can be used to scoop the tree out of the ground. My father-in-law, he used to own a citrus farm in WA, and he would tell me how to move their trees. They'd get a digger and scoop out grapefruit and orange trees and move them to another spot. There are also dedicated tree transplanting machines that professional orchards and nurseries use. If you are transplanting into a container or grow bag, you can prune back some of the roots that might be sticking out or too big and cumbersome. Plant the tree into the new, hopefully better spot at the ground level it was before. I know there are some fruit trees you can supposedly replant deeper up the stem to promote more root growth, but this can also cause stem rot or collar rot. So I would advise replanting back at the same height in ground just to be safe. Water the tree after replanting, preferably with a seaweed tonic, as this mix helps to relieve transplant shock. Water in well so that you make sure the soil is properly settled around the roots. Mulch around the base of the tree to reduce water loss and protect the feeder roots of the tree from the sun. This also reduces weeds and it stops the soil from crusting over, making it difficult for water to penetrate. And then do a final prune to remove any unnecessary growth or fruit that will take energy away from the tree as it's trying to re-establish itself. The fruit tree will take at least 3 or 4 months to establish, so make sure over that time you water it often when needed to make sure that you don't at any stage make it suffer water stress. And as you can see, this kumquat 12 months later is doing pretty well. It could do with a bit of a feed and some trace elements, and the fruit is a little bit old, but I wanted to keep that on there for effect until I've done this video. But overall, I'm really happy with the results. And for now, I'm going to keep it in this grow bag because I'm quite liking it as a small dwarf container citrus. However, not all fruit trees transplant as good as this. Some fruit trees might not transplant well despite how careful you are, such as avocados, mainly due to their fragile taproot and hatred of root disturbance. Or the tree simply might not make it because it lacks the energy due to the problems it had and also compounded by the transplant shock. You can't save everything. Either way, don't beat yourself up over it, as it's only a tree and it likely needed to be moved for a good reason, so it probably wouldn't have ended well regardless, and at least you tried. As for this mulberry tree, 12 years later, well, you can see it's doing really well. It's producing a lot of fruit, and you could probably do with a good prune back and let it regrow. But I couldn't be happier, and I'm glad that I made that effort to move it from down there, which is really only about 10 meters, but it made the world of difference. But if you follow these instructions closely, even if you have to watch this video 10 times and share it around to everyone you know, I'm sure you'll get a fruit tree transplant just as good as this one. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you transplant your finger onto that thumbs up button and give this video a big thumbs up. Also, share it around and subscribe if you haven't already. I've already said share it, didn't I? Thanks a lot for watching. Bye for now. Cheers.